Hello, everyone. My name is Avery Joyce Eastman, and today I'm going to be talking about the silent protest parade that took place in New York on July 28th, 1917. Alright, so I wanted to talk about some of the precursors to the parade. Some of the major catalysts of the silent parade were the East St. Louis riots, as well as the lynching of Jesse Washington in Waco, Texas, and the lynching of L. Persons in Memphis, Tennessee. So the East St. Louis riots were possibly the most significant contributor to the silent parade. In February of 1917, 470 African-American workers were hired to replace white workers who had gone on strike against the aluminum ore company. This caused an increase in racial tensions in the city of East St. Louis, Illinois. Just a few months later, in May of the same year, rumors of an attempted robbery of a white man by an armed black man began to spread throughout the city. A mob of white townspeople formed and rampaged downtown, beating any black person they came across on their way, also pulling them out of public transit to beat them. The National Guard was called and was able to disperse the crowd, but unfortunately this was only the beginning. 2 months later, on July 2nd, 1917, the white mobs resumed, this time beating and shooting black men, women, and children. Later in the day, white people began burning the houses of black people, forcing them to either burn alive in their homes or run outside just to be shot on sight by the rioters. There were also several lynchings taking place throughout the burning city. The National Guard was called once again, but this time it was not able to stop the chaos for hours, leaving somewhere between 40 and 250 African Americans dead and about 6,000 homeless. Jesse Washington was a 17-year-old African-American farmhand who lived in Waco, Texas. He was arrested and charged with the murder of the wife of his employer, who was killed and sexually assaulted on May 8, 1916. Washington was found guilty after only a 1-hour-long trial. While being escorted out of the courthouse, Washington was seized by spectators who had gathered in and outside of the courthouse, and he was dragged outside. Washington was stabbed, beaten, and burned alive. Parts of his body were also cut off to be sold as souvenirs throughout the city. Onlookers and participants were reported as being giddy about the lynching. And this lynching was one of the most well-documented in history. There was a photographer at the scene taking pictures of the lynching in progress. Previously, there had been photographs of lynchings after the fact, but this was the first time that it was ever recorded in progress. And newspapers around the country condemned the event. There was a lot of media coverage. However, the citizens of Waco seemed to feel no remorse for the lynching. L. Persons was a 50-year-old woodcutter from Memphis, Tennessee. Antoinette Rappel went missing on April 30th, 1917, and was later found dead. Several black men were taken in for questioning for her murder before L. Persons was. And once he was taken in, he was questioned for about 24 hours, by the end of which police claim that Persons admitted guilt. Rappel's body was exhumed because the police claimed that they could see Persons' image burned into her pupils. Before his trial could even begin, he was captured by a mob. No police protection was provided to Persons, despite rumors and planning of the lynching being widely known throughout the city before the fact. And L. Persons was chained down and burned alive on May 22nd, 1917, with his remains displayed across town. No one was charged. Right, so as a response to this, James Weldon Johnson of the NAACP worked with community members to strategize a response to these atrocious crimes. Organizers felt it was important for only Black people to participate in the protest, considering they were the ones being targeted and most affected by these crimes. Reverend Dr. Hutchins C. Bishop served as president of the parade, and Reverend Dr. Charles D. Martin served as the secretary. Dr. Martin wrote a call to action called Why We March. and it laid out the rationale for the protest and was distributed before and during the parade. Okay, so pictured here, we have a copy of Why We March. This document covers the logistics of the parade, such as where to meet and how to assemble, as well as a list of reasons given to march for. Some of those listed include: we march because we deem it a crime to be silent in the face of such barbaric acts. We march because we want our children to live in a better land and enjoy fairer conditions than have fallen to our lot. We march because the growing solidarity of race coupled with sorrow and discrimination have made us one, a union that may never be dissolved in spite of shallow-brained agitators, scheming pundits, and political tricksters who secure fleeting popularity and uncertain financial support by promoting the disunion of a people who ought to consider themselves as one. Alright, and then on July 28, 1917, somewhere between 8,000 and 15,000 African Americans marched from 57th Street down 5th Avenue to 23rd Street. Police led the parade, followed by women and children dressed in white, and ending with men dressed in black, which is like mourning clothes. The parade was completely silent with no speaking at all, but drums sounded gently in the background. There were onlookers from both sides of Fifth Avenue, and some white citizens stopped to hear out the reasoning behind the parade, offering their sympathies. Media coverage of the parade helped the movement gain traction and visibility and resulted in good press for the NAACP. Black leaders of the movement, a couple of them actually had an appointment with the president. However, this appointment was not kept. They went all the way to Washington, D.C., only to be told that he was busy with another appointment. They left a petition for President Wilson. However, federal discrimination actually increased during his presidency, and he did not keep any of his promises to the Black community. The media attention from the parade did spark a lot of empathy from Jewish communities around the country, which we heard a lot about in our book. They were a huge contributor to the NAACP. And another silent parade was held in Newark, New Jersey a year later in 1918. All right, so 100 years later, on the 100th anniversary of the parade on July 28, 2017, a reenactment was to take place, led by the NAACP as well as Black artists and activists. This wasn't able to take place on 5th Avenue as the original one did because Trump Towers was located along that strip, so instead it took place along 6th Avenue. And the issues being protested exactly 100 years after the original silent parade echo the issues faced then: violence and discrimination against Black Americans. Almost 103 years after the silent protest parade, on May 26, 2020, a series of protests began in response to the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as well as several other police killings of unarmed Black Americans. By June 1st, there have been ongoing protests in at least 120 cities across the United States. As increasingly violent police forces escalate these protests and media demonizes the protesters for rioting and looting, we must ask ourselves, what will it take for Black Americans to be treated as equal in the United States and for the immoral and unjust murders of Black Americans by police to end? Thank you.